and welcome to this webinar on the subject of hypertension presented for Nutri-Link by myself, Anthony Haynes, registered nutritional therapist, on the 24th of June 2020. Let's get this slide started. Thank you so much for taking time out of very busy lives indeed to take care of this subject for yourselves, for your CPD. So what are we going to be talking about? Now, as ever, before I get to that, you have the opportunity of asking questions, and forgive the delay on the recent Q&A. With so many webinars coming up, I haven't got to complete those just yet for the last couple of webinars. But by Friday, 2 days' time, please send in questions. If it's a case history, please post it on the CE forum. But a short question about something that comes up today, because I'm not really going to have much time to answer questions. It's more of a delivery of the information I regret than a workshop. And then please send that email to that email questions, and I'll do my best to include that. Well, I'll include it in the anonymized Q&A document to be sent out at a later date. So learning objectives: the incidence and significance of a high blood pressure, the major lifestyle influences on blood pressure, the influence of hormones on blood pressure, and you'll be surprised by one of them, I suspect, how exercise benefits or affects blood pressure, no surprise there, the major nutritional influences on blood pressure. It's got a lot to do with oxidative stress, and I'll introduce the renin-angiotensinogen system, the RAS, to you. Also a little bit of a highlight focus on amino acid taurine and how that influences blood pressure, and also really emphasize the importance of optimizing endothelial function and the role of antioxidants in cardiovascular health, but particularly for blood pressure. So the incidence of hypertension accessed a few days ago. Around 1/3 of all adults in the UK have high blood pressure, although some don't realize it. That's quite some number of adults, which actually pose a significant risk for the factors and the conditions I'll highlight in the next slides. So as a general guide, the actual level of blood pressure above 140/90 is believed to be high, or certainly if you're over the age of 80, it's a little bit higher. An ideal blood pressure is considered between 1960 and 120/80, and I would say that 117/75 might be an ideal blood pressure for most people, 117/75. But readings between 120/80 and 140/90 is sort of means you're at risk, and certainly it's not ideal to have that, suggesting that it's going too high, and one needs to take steps to take blood pressure under control. In the year 2000, with stats that I found available, near 1 billion adults in the world population had high blood pressure. 1 billion. The rate of blood pressure is increasing. So in 95, 43 million people, which is 22% in the United States, had hypertension or were taking antihypertensive medication. 2006, so 11 years after that, 76 million adults had hypertension. That's 34% of the population. So it's startlingly large numbers and having huge effect on health. And this is what it puts you at risk of. Obviously, it's part of the heart disease profile, increases the risk of heart attacks and strokes, heart failure, also peripheral arterial disease, aortic aneurysms, kidney disease, and vascular dementia. So blood pressure, hugely significant, and has been identified already. It can be a quiescent, a hidden thing that we don't actually know is going on. So it is important to assess one's blood pressure, but not just and again, most cardiovascular conditions actually can have a negative impact on kidney disease. So chronic kidney disease is extremely common. Also, chronic kidney disease leads to heart disease. There's almost an inevitability. It's a question of which one's diagnosed first. So here are the risks, the standard risks. Who's going to have high blood pressure, and what would you be doing to have high blood pressure? And here is some of the answers. So if you're over 65, so clearly, like many conditions, it's got to do with how old you are. If you're overweight, that can definitely be a factor. We know there are certain ethnicities, such as African and Caribbean descent, that have an increased likelihood of having a blood pressure that's high. Or if you have a relative, particularly a direct relative with high blood pressure, that's a risk factor for you too. Eating too much salt a day, and the suggestion is more than 6 grams a day, and it can be so easy to consume more for having processed, refined, salty foods, and one doesn't eat enough fruit and vegetables with the apportionate potassium and magnesium to offset the sodium. If you don't do enough exercise, that can be a risk factor too. Drinking too much alcohol and caffeine, rather obviously, or other caffeine-based drinks. If you smoke, that's very clear because the oxidative stress from that. And interestingly and importantly, we return to sleep. Poor or disturbed sleep can absolutely lead to an increased blood pressure. If you have an excess inappropriate stress, I mean, stress, some people say, I thrive off stress. Oh, I love it. My sort of was busy and stress, and I seem to do well with that. And if I have a quiet moment, I'm looking forward to that quiet moment, mind you, and then maybe almost make me feel more anxious that I'm not getting things done. I don't know if you can relate to that, or maybe I'm just trapped in the wheel of busyness. And then lastly, I've added this on particularly because that's not the standard risk factors, is oxidative stress, which is definitely invisible and hidden. The increased level of reactive oxygen species or reactive nitrogen species, so ROS or RNS, increases the risk there. So it's been quite well quoted in this paper from a couple of years ago that hypertension is a complex multifactorial and multi-system disorder, as originally described by a man called Irving Page, and in his something called mosaic theory, when he proposed that high blood pressure involves an interplay among the genetic, environmental, anatomic, adaptive, neural, endocrine, humoral, and hemodynamic factors. So yes, multifactorial. And we'll be looking at what may be, although it's a multifactorial factor, what may be a singular negative that actually has an impact on all of those. So straightforward, lifestyle changes to reduce blood pressure, but how many of us do them? So there's on the left-hand side, the usual things is reduce the amount of salt you eat. And it's estimated from one study that I read that was a review of how salt affects individuals' blood pressure. It was 28% of folk were deemed to be salt sensitive for blood pressure, meaning that if you reduce salt, you'd lower blood pressure straight away, or if you ate too much salt, your blood pressure would go up. But certainly the more salt you ingest, the more you retain water, the more pressure that puts on your arteries. And salt's also a poison for the stomach, literally a poison for the stomach. So it's a good thing to avoid NaCl. Himalayan salt has a different mix of natural salts with more potassium and has less of a negative impact, but all salts can contribute, certainly the NaCl on its own, negative factor. Eat a very healthy diet, and we'll be looking more at that today because it's a throwaway line really. What is a very healthy diet? And I've got in this slide deck, I've got lots of foods with specific references that have been the subject of studies that have been found to be good for the cardiovascular system and blood pressure. And I'll show you those. I won't go through them all, but that's listed at the end of the slide deck. Obviously, cutting back on alcohol or cutting it out. Losing weight if you're overweight. Again, a very simplistic, got two lines there. Eat a very healthy diet. What is that? And then losing weight if you're overweight. Much more simply said than done. Exercising regularly can be very helpful, but it's a question of not doing too intense. Cutting down on caffeine, rather obviously, and stopping smoking. So very straightforward. And maybe none of us necessarily have any issues with those, but it's our clients that do rather than us. And then on the right-hand side, very straightforward, meditation. And you've got various different types. You've got formal periods of time in the day that you can sit and meditate. You can play some music and meditate in your prayer room or wherever you're at, or you can have a moving meditation where you can be doing something inane, or you can be walking somewhere and you can actually engage in a mindful state whilst moving. So, and I recommend that to lots of people because lots of people don't commit the time always. Well, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, great. What about during the day? Maybe going for a walk, going into the garden, or just walking down the street. You can engage in mindful meditation. Qigong, amongst other sort of gentle and Tai Chi martial arts, and energy control martial arts, very, very useful and very effective for supporting blood pressure. There's also some very straightforward, slow, deep breathing processes, because when you breathe out, you immediately engage the parasympathetic system, and when you breathe in, you engage the sympathetic. So just breathing out longer than in, you can create a dominance with the parasympathetic system, and this can help blood pressure. And so if you did have a blood pressure machine, a SFIG, you could actually try it out. You could test your blood pressure after sitting down for a few minutes and see what it is, and then you can engage in the breathing exercises for 2 or 3 minutes, take your blood pressure again, and see the difference. And having that sort of experience for yourself can also be a brilliant thing to then relate to your clients, because it shows that you've been there and done that, and it can have that impact. But it's also then engaging in that breathing process, if you can, most of the day, so that you're not sort of then building up the stresses and over the day. So it's really intermittently during the day is the best way to go. Now, a little bit of focus on some of the major hormones, just really 2 major hormones of cortisol, and then the somewhat surprising low thyroid can also influence blood pressure, and high thyroid can too, but it's the low thyroid perhaps the biggest surprise. Now we know about cortisol, it is the major glucocorticoid. It's essential for maintenance of blood pressure, but in excess, it produces hypertension. Now, so studies have shown that they looked at ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, from the anterior pituitary, and they assessed its level, and they were saying, well, is it the ACTH or is it actually the cortisol which raises blood pressure? So they've done studies, and they've shown that ACTH increases blood pressure in both normal folk with normotension, so normal blood pressure, and hypertensive subjects. It raises blood pressure. But they've identified it's unlikely that it's the direct action of ACTH that's involved. It's much more likely to be the cortisol response, not ACTH. They've also identified there's no relationship between the mineralocorticoid excess, the aldosterone, and hypertension. There's a drug called spironolactone, which is a mineralocorticoid antagonist, and that did not significantly lower blood pressure in patients with elevated cortisol. Now, when cortisol is given to folk with normal blood pressure, it reproducibly raises blood pressure. So again, it's quite clear and distinct that one of the hormones we talk a lot about in nutrition, because it's so relevant to do with stress, cortisol is a factor. So that's a really important form of assessment. And the salivary test, the adrenal stress profile testing, and we've now got the cortisol awakening response test, very, very useful to get a grip on whether that's a factor in your client with a raised blood pressure. There's some evidence that cortisol excess may be a feature of essential hypertension, which is one medical diagnosis. And in this particular study, they found 153 patients with essential hypertension versus 18 normal blood pressure folk, and they found that the higher plasma cortisol is present effectively in the urine, but also in blood tests. In the second test, in something called the Paris prospective study, and morning plasma cortisol concentrations were elevated in untreated male hypertensive. So again, that's where the cortisol awakening response and the salivary testing would be a very useful marker. That's the free levels, but this test was plasma, looking at the total cortisol. So I think at least it's possible to test cortisol with saliva without having to have blood tests. Again, access to that saliva test is so useful. In summary, really, cortisol-induced hypertension is normally associated with an increase in cardiac output, but the output is not essential for a blood pressure rise, which can be mediated either by output or vascular resistance. And vascular resistance is what we'll be talking about next when it comes on to the thyroid hormone. So high blood pressure, mostly the diastolic, is increased in patients with hypothyroidism because of this increased peripheral vascular resistance. Hypothyroidism causes aortic stiffness and hypertension, usually the diastolic marker. Thyroid hormone therapy decreases aortic stiffness, so giving more thyroid hormone. So it's the opposite of cortisol. It's low level of thyroid hormone that actually increases blood pressure, and thyroid hormone therapy, raising T4 and then T3, decreases aortic stiffness, promoting decreased blood pressure in about 50% of these patients. And they've also found that low iodine levels have a significant correlation with systolic blood pressure. So thyroid hormone is more associated with diastolic, but iodine is associated with systolic. So just an interesting, is that you think with a low thyroid, the sort of metabolism will be lower and it wouldn't work so well. But we know that as we get older, it's much more likely to have a low thyroid function, essentially. Now I'm just going to check here. We've got a, okay. One of us has had an issue with sound. I'm hoping that that can be resolved. Excuse the interruption. Hopefully one of us can take care of that. So apologies for the interruption, and I hope you get your sound back. So it's low thyroid leads to high blood pressure, low iodine, high blood pressure. Really interesting. And again, high cortisol, you may be familiar with this. High cortisol has a direct impact on inhibiting the activity of the deiodinase, the D1 and D2 enzymes that work peripherally to convert T4 to T3. So the high cortisol can increase blood pressure on its own through either resistance or vascular output. And it can impair thyroid hormone function, and low thyroid hormone function can actually lead to high blood pressure too. And then separately, you've got low iodine, which has been found to be significantly correlated with a systolic blood pressure being too high. Okay. So here is a model showing the influence of triiodothyronine, which is T3. We often forget what that actually is, but triiodothyronine, and really we're talking about free T3 rather than the bound one, the bound level of hormones. And again, it's a tiny amount. It's measured in picomoles, not nanomoles, for the free T3 and free T4. T3 supports something called thermogenesis. So it's the tissue thermogenesis. It's actually the generation of heat through energy in tissues. So it's a really important part of temperature control. And that leads to a decreased systemic vascular resistance. So having adequate T3 decreases vascular resistance, which then leads to decrease effective arterial filling volume with increased renal sodium reabsorption, and then an increased blood volume, and then cardiac contractility, leads to increased cardiac, something called inotropy and chronotropy, leading to increased cardiac output. So effectively, you need enough T3, but if you have too low a level, that can lead to this negative spiral. So adequate levels support the body, but low levels are having a negative impact. And if you give iodine supplementation, given that iodine has the 3 molecules on the tyrosine molecule of the T3, iodine supplementation and adequate T3 can help to lower blood pressure and stop that cycle. So it's also been identified that iodine deficiency is extremely common in cardiovascular disease, as it would be in most Western countries, because most people don't have enough iodine. We get it from seaweed and seafood, and it's very common not to have enough iodine. It was iodized salt was available at some stage, but it was decided against as a food policy not to recommend iodine. And there is a definite connection between iodine and too much iodine, and it potentially making Hashimoto's and autoimmune thyroid worse. One does need to take care with iodine, but nonetheless, it's estimated that the vast majority of the population may be on the border or have an inadequacy of iodine, such an important nutrient for cardiovascular health in particular. And so the statement here from these researchers, some time ago, over 20 years ago, iodine supplementation might prevent the worsening effect of iodine deficiency on cardiovascular disease. It's been present for a long time, but I hadn't seen any action being taken effectively to help to correct that. So those two hormones are really important to assess those. Now, blood testing for thyroid hormone is not always very helpful. And the recent research shows that actually 2 researchers who've been researching thyroid for decades finally come out and said that it's completely, let me rephrase that. They've identified without any shadow of a doubt that what is circulating in the blood in terms of T4 and T3 in no way whatsoever reflects the intracellular levels of T4 and T3. Now, most of us perhaps listening to this knew that, but it's great to get 2 really solid researchers who spent decades in the field finally acknowledging that in a paper in 2017, 2018. So you can't, so the blood test may not be super useful, and you must get the free T4 and free T3, possibly the reverse T3, and it's worthwhile assessing thyroid antibodies as well. Otherwise, a salivary cortisol test would be useful to assess that picture. So when you've got the case history, check out the signs and symptoms of those 2 things, the stress factor, obviously the case history can tell you that, they can tell you that, and then more hidden is their thyroid hormone function. It can be very relevant to blood pressure. Exercise, it's very straightforward, this information. I'll go through it swiftly to get onto the much more important information about the renin-angiotensinogen and the oxidative stress. It's estimated about 2.5 hours a week is recommended. And we engage in activity every day and some cardiovascular responses, as well as some weights and so on. Regular physical activity makes your heart stronger, and being more active can lower your systolic blood pressure. And for some people, taking the exercise can be equally as effective as taking medication effectively. Some people getting some exercise is enough to reduce their blood pressure. Okay. I know some of you are experiencing volume issues, and I apologize with that. My microphone is right here, and it's not changing my end, so apologies for you having that difficulty. You will get access to the recording of this, should you then need to listen to something again. So aerobic activity can be a more effective way of controlling high blood pressure. If one does weights, certainly one's blood pressure can go up temporarily, but that can also support blood pressure. Again, we've got indications of 150 minutes of moderate aerobic activity or 75 minutes of more vigorous aerobic activity a week can help to support the cardiovascular system and blood pressure. So we knew that. Now let's talk about the more relevant factors about the major nutritional influences on blood pressure, particularly oxidative stress. So a hypothesis, which I think is pretty well documented and proven now, so it's interesting researchers still use that term, have identified that oxidative stress is a key player in the pathogenesis of high blood pressure. Endothelial cells play a major role in arterial relaxation, and nitric oxide is released by the endothelium and it causes vascular relaxation. Nitric oxide is rapidly degraded by the oxygen-derived free radical superoxide anion. And this superoxide anion acts as a vasoconstrictor and is a major determinant of nitric oxide biosynthesis and bioavailability. Therefore, the superoxide anion can modify the endothelial function. So oxidative stress can have a significant role to play in the vasoconstriction or arterial relaxation. Blood pressure in humans is associated with the decrease in the nitric oxide bioavailability and an increase in oxidative stress. It's straightforward to say, and it affects all that the mosaic that Irvine Page was referring to. Decreased catalase or SOD and reduced levels of reactive oxygen species or RNS scavengers such as glutathione. Straightforward antioxidants, vitamin C and vitamin E can also contribute to oxidative stress. And how many folk do we know have a low level of some form of antioxidant? An activation of that reduction oxidation, that redox processing signaling cascades and NADPH oxidase, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, driven generation of those free radicals are involved in the role of angiotensin II induced hypertension. So I'm going to show you the model of this in the next slide. So angiotensin II stimulates a non-phagocytic NADPH oxidase, causing the accumulation of hydrogen peroxide, superoxide, and peroxynitrite, these oxidative stress markers. So that in itself is quite dense information, but I've got a diagram to show you more information. Effectively, oxidative stress triggers a cascade of events which leads to the triggering of the angiotensin II, which actually then in itself stimulates NADPH, causing more reactive oxygen species. We've got a diagram coming up. So angiotensin II, that potent activator of this enzyme NADPH oxidase, contributes to the production of more reactive oxygen species, which in the ROS actually makes the angiotensin II more negative. It also upregulates the activity of SOD, possibly to compensate for the increased levels of reactive oxygen species, does angiotensin II. So we have a model, a diagram with NADPH oxidase in the middle, so that's the reactive oxygen species, and look at the multiplicity of effects it has. The green arrows obviously is more of this, and the red is obviously a blocking factor. So it has an impact on immunity, it has a direct impact on thyroid hormone synthesis, looking at iodine, the role of iodine in the role of supporting the thyroid glands. So the oxidative stress impairs that, which can directly increase blood pressure, as we just learned. It also influences the calcium-potassium gates, increasing calcium influx, and has an impact on endoplasmic reticulum stress. The low oxygen can also then have a role to play on angiogenesis and promotes endothelial damage. We've got apoptosis and growth, the cell cycle with cellular senescence being affected by these free radicals. And also they block protein tyrosine phosphates, and they block insulin signaling, meaning you're going to have more insulin, so it induces insulin resistance, and also has a direct impact on the gene expression of production of inflammatory cytokines. So there's an awful lot going on with NADPH oxidase reactive oxygen species. And so put more simply into a model, we've got oxidative stress on the left, and we've got the sources made from within the body, then mitochondria, peroxisomes, and inflammatory cells. And then we have the exogenous sources from radiation, from ozone, and from xenobiotics and toxins. And that all of that gangs up on us, and our antioxidant system is enzymatic. So we have our sodium catalase, and we have glutathione peroxidase and peroxidase enzymes, and we have non-enzymatic, which we can actually ingest through foods and supplements, the vitamin C, E, the glutathione, and flavonoids, of which there are thousands. It's interesting that flavonoids act as one of the family of goitrogens. There are goitrins, isothionates, and flavonoids that can have a direct role to play as goitrogens. But really, when one cooks food, those are pretty much neutralized, and I'm not quite sure, honestly, how much goitrogens have a negative impact. But I think if one's having a lot of soy with the genistein and the daidzein as flavonoids, that might have an impact. But I would say that goitrogens generally don't have a big impact on individuals' thyroid hormone function. Here are some references with regard to oxidative stress and blood pressure. So we are starting to then look at this renin-angiotensinogen system, RAS, and guess what? It's oxidative stress, inflammation, and mitochondrial dysfunction that mediates this renin renin-angiotensinogen system in metabolic diseases. So here we have a model, and it gives a breakdown of the various different of the peptides of angiotensinogen, effectively being converted to angiotensinogen 1 to angiotensinogen 2, which then activates the AT1, or i.e. the angiotensinogen 1 or 2 receptor, which has a direct impact on blood pressure. And hence, and I'll show you a little slide later on, where drugs have been involved. So look at this model here, just remember this, so you've got renin, you've got the ACE, and then you've got the angiotensinogen 2, and then you've got the AT1 and AT2 receptors. So remember this slide if you can. In a few slides' time, we'll show you where the medications fit in for that. This is a description of that process, which I'm not going to read through, but that's for your interest. And I am going to carry on. Okay. The next slide is a description of this unifying paradigm in hypertension, which is all focusing on oxidative stress. So we have the reactive oxygen species, and it shows you've got the angiotensinogen 2 receptor top left, or angiotensinogen, which then latches onto the AT1 receptor. You've got the sodium influx here. You've got the TNF alpha translating into messengers that increase reactive oxygen species. You've got mitochondrial dysfunction. You've got endoplasmic reticulum stress, the ER stress, and all of those things lead to an increase in oxidative stress and inflammatory mediators and immune activation. And that leads to vascular dysfunction, renal injury, cardiovascular fibrosis, and effectively hypertension, so blood pressure. So this is a neat little model. Again, it's that unifying paradigm in hypertension. Okay, I understand some of you are having issues with sound. I regret that. I'm not sure. I really am sorry that not all of you can follow, but I don't know if it's all of you. So again, excuse that interruption. Okay, I wonder if it's got to do with signaling. I wonder if it's got to do with the fact that so many people are on their computers at home, or I don't know. So this is this really describes the last slide. It gives you the acronyms and what they are. And this is the published in May 2020. So last month, this paper came out in the Canadian Journal of Cardiology by a chap called Toys RM et al. Oxidative stress. So a really bang up to date study looking at the role of oxidative stress in blood pressure. So here we have a model where the drugs fit in. So we have angiotensinogen, which converts to angiotensin 1, and then angiotensin 2, which then basically initiates vasoconstriction through binding with the AT1 receptors. Now renin activates that process and ACE activates that, so refer back to the previous slides. And the drugs come in, so you have renin inhibitors. So for controlling blood pressure, there are 3 different classes of medications: the renin inhibitors, and you've got the ACE inhibitors, and then you've got the AT1 antagonists, sartan, for example, which can often be the most effective, but ACE inhibitors are often the ones first given, essentially. Okay, thanks for confirming that for a lot of folk, the sound is just fine, so I regret that one of you or 2 of you is having issues. So this is actually showing us how the medications, where they're operating in this RAS system, this renin-angiotensinogen system. So again, oxidative stress playing a significant role here, and accumulation over time can have an impact too. Hence, age is a strong risk factor for hypertension. So let's talk about specific nutrients. So we've got half the webinar. Again, thank you so much for your attention. Half the webinar through, and let's look at some key nutrients and blood pressure health. And how many clients do you have with blood pressure? I was speaking with Michael Ash, as I do most days, and just describing how few of my clients come in with cardiovascular issues. But I see many clients who, oh, by the way, I've got high blood pressure, I'm taking the medication, but they weren't coming in for that. It's like, oh yes, it's as if blood pressure is a completely different phenomenon and I need the medication and there's nothing to do about it, but I'm going to come and see you about my headaches or my gut issues and so on. So maybe you have the same thought or the same experience with your clients. I do find it rather odd that, okay, no, the doctor said I'd be on that medication for life, so I'm going to be on it for life and I'm not going to seek any help for it. It's almost like it's a different, like it's not connected to the rest of the body. I do find that rather odd. So the therapeutic target is clearly going to be reducing oxidative stress, which influences the myriad signaling molecules and multiple pathways in multiple cells and tissues and organs and systems. And it represents a common molecular mechanism. So although it's really complicated in that multifactorial mosaic, and I'm not asking you to repeat the RAS system, but you get the drift of it. But one common molecular mechanism is to reduce oxidative stress. So that's the beauty. So although we're used to multifactorial phenomena in nutritional therapy with an holistic perspective, looking at systems approach rather than disease-oriented or squashing symptoms, but actually in this instance, we're actually narrowing it down to one fundamental phenomenon, which is to reduce oxidative stress. And as part of achieving that, we can use a variety of different nutrients, and I've listed ones here that have been shown to be useful in blood pressure itself. So we refer to vitamin C and E. Vitamin D has been also shown to be effective at helping blood pressure. Iodine, interesting, not an antioxidant, but vital for blood pressure maintenance, and it's something that's just extremely common to be low in. So do be aware of iodine. The RDA, I believe, is 150 micrograms. Some individuals might need a lot more than that, and if there are excess halogens in the body, like bromide and fluoride, they will have latched onto the halogen receptor and make it less likely for any iodine to be absorbed usefully. So do be aware of that. So some people may need a lot more than 150 micrograms of iodine per day. It also protects against radiation. As you may be aware, with Fukushima and Chernobyl, the population groups were handed out kelp tablets with iodine to protect their thyroid. And again, if thyroid goes down, then blood pressure increases more likely. Coenzyme Q10 has been studied on its own and found to be very useful for blood pressure. Fatty acids are important to support the production of prostaglandins, and we're talking about omega-3 and omega-6. Magnesium is nature's tranquilizer molecule, very important for relaxation, whereas calcium is involved in contraction. Magnesium is involved in relaxation. Lipoic acid, an antioxidant in and of itself, but also a supporter and maintainer of glutathione. NAC, one of the 3 amino acid of the tripeptide of glutathione that's most likely to be lacking and can directly increase glutathione more than taking the tripeptide glutathione. But now we have liposomal glutathione available, which means that we can actually take that, and that can have a tremendous effect. I think the number of nutrients that have been delivered in liposomal format is changing the landscape of nutritional intervention, I believe. And taurine, I'll talk more about that. Dare I say it's my favorite amino acid. Which one is yours? I don't know how many of you have attended a webinar or teaching of mine on amino acids, but which one would you be and why? In the balloon debate, and I'll be taurine, and I'll explain why. Grapeseed extract, separately on its own in combination, has been found to lower blood pressure. Interestingly, biotin, not just important for hair growth, but also been found to be useful in blood pressure. And vitamin B6, did you know low B6 levels have been associated with high blood pressure? So we've got a number of key nutrients and antioxidants to consider, and it is limited. I mean, there are many more antioxidants and so on. And of course, we want to ingest a wide array of antioxidant flavonoids as we can as well. Here is a formula that Dr. Mark Houston, the international lecturer and associate professor of hypertension at the Vanderbilt University, and he's put this formula together for biotics research. I'll share with you. It's called BioCardioCert BP, BioCardioCert BP. The product code is there, and these are the ingredients. So he's put this together as a powder, and it's got 1,000 per 1 rounded scoop. It's 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. It's magnesium ascorbate, providing just a small amount of magnesium, just 87 milligrams. B6 as pyridoxine, not as P5P. Biotin, 2,000 micrograms, and vitamin D, just 50 mcg, but it's still 1,000% of the RDA, of course, and a proprietary blend of 6,150 milligrams of taurine and a specific patented grapeseed extract. So just look at that dose there. So 6,150 milligrams. So the largest proportion of this particular supplement is taurine, and it's estimated, as far as I know, because it's a proprietary level, we're not able to identify exactly how much, but I believe it's maybe over 5,000 milligrams of taurine, and obviously a considerably lot less of grapeseed, but a good dose of grapeseed extract as well. So this formula here was used in a trial, and the conclusion of this trial was that it helps to lower blood pressure, and the study reports a significant reduction of systolic blood pressure over a 4-week period of time using that standardized blend of 7 nutrients. So it's just an interesting mix that Dr. Mark Houston put together with his experience and knowledge about how to regulate blood pressure. The study could be longer, of course, but it's certainly a point of principle, and it's a supplement that I've used, and it invariably, in fact, there's just one case that I remember, and of course my memory may fail me, but one case whose blood pressure did not lower, one case, and of course there may be others, but so there's always individuals who don't follow the law, where something is so useful, but this supplement is super useful at helping to support blood pressure, which can be a tremendously important factor. So here's some information about taurine. What do you know about taurine? Obviously taurine, Taurus, the bull, taurine, so it's actually good for bile support, but let's have a look here what it says. So it's an abundant free amino acid found in mammalian cells, and it's abundant certainly if you're an omnivore, but if you're a vegetarian, then where are you going to get the taurine? Because taurine is mainly from animal proteins, and it contributes to many physiological functions, from that of a simple cell osmolyte, so it's involved in the fluid balance of cells, to a program of adult health and disease. Fascinating information, this really is intriguing. So taurine's contribution extends from conception throughout life, but its most critical exposure is during perinatal life. So effectively, having adequate levels in utero and the beginning of life has a vital effects on the rest of life. So the question I've just got, I can't answer too many questions, but yes, you can use this medication with blood pressure medication, so the supplement with blood pressure medications, but be aware that it is a potent thing, and you might end up with an individual having a low blood pressure, too low a level. So do be aware of that. So you may wish to introduce that on a titrated level, and because it's a powder, one could actually engage in that too. So in adults, taurine supplementation prevents or alleviates cardiovascular disease and related complications. Of course, we're not treating conditions, we're supporting the individual with the condition. But in contrast, low taurine consumption, which is often found and would inevitably be found in a vegetarian diet, coincides with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. So taurine, it is my favorite amino acid because it is so diverse. It also has other characteristics, such as, and the name of the supplement is BioCardioCert BP. Now you've got the notes, but if you were to, in the slide notes, so if you were to type in the product code BR2905 into the Nutri-Link website, you'll find it there. Okay, so taurine. So the ability of perinatal taurine exposure to influence arterial pressure control mechanisms and hypertension in adult life appears to involve the regulation of growth and development, the central autonomic nervous system, and the RAS system, glucose-insulin interaction, and changes to heart, blood vessels, and kidney function. To me, absolutely fascinating. So absolutely vital that, of course, the responsibility of mums, but the perinatal exposure, hugely relevant, affecting life thereafter. So if you're a vegetarian and you're pregnant, you won't be getting enough taurine, I doubt. It's only found in animal meats, in the same way carnitine is as well. So taurine, hugely relevant. It's also the only amino acid not bound in body proteins. Did you know that? TAU. So taurine not bound in body proteins, the only amino acid. So it's also an antioxidant, helps bile flow, it helps make tauroxicolic acid. It's a precursor for GABA. 50% of the amino acids in the heart is taurine. 50% of the amino acids in the heart is taurine. So if you go vegetarian, what's happening to your heart? So there are question marks about that. Again, fascinating information. It's taurine. It is one of the most diverse functioning amino acids. So really, really tremendous benefits. And also particularly having exposure in the past. If we can't do anything about our historical exposure, we can do something about it now. So taurine is a supplement that I've long used. It's available in supplements like beta TCP, which supports bile flow, again providing taurine there too. So if you are vegetarian, then do consider a taurine supplement. Now it may be that the taurine is derived from animal sources, but you need to check that out, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that one. Taurine is reported to decrease blood pressure in human animal models of high blood pressure. It acts centrally in some brain areas and peripherally as well. It also directly and indirectly affects arterial pressure control mechanisms. So really a terrific benefit for the cardiovascular system, taurine. So it's a non-essential amino acid, but I often refer to it as a vital non-essential, and it may be semi-essential in some individuals, particularly if they're vegan or they are vegetarian. Here we have a summary in this 2014 paper of the functions of taurine. I'm not going to go through too many, I've already read some of them out, but just a nice summary of the different functions, and also increases insulin secretion, so important for blood sugar regulation as well. Okay. I'm gonna, any questions you have now, forgive me, that's difficult for me to read that, so I'm gonna carry on. So CoQ10, moving on, supplements, CoQ10, various different trials have shown 100 to 200 milligrams of CoQ10 helps to lower blood pressure in those who've got a high blood pressure, and so that's evidence for CoQ10 being effective. And here we got summary recommendations for blood pressure. For non-nutritional recommendations, yes, take exercise and be active, no doubt about it. And for some of us during this strange time of lockdown, we've been able to actually engage in more regular activity, which has been a real boon, and we're encouraged to do so. And clearly, very, very important. But also during the working time, we can also be perhaps rooted to our desk more and less active because we're not going out. But take a break every hour. And my proposal is you engage in 3 to 5 minutes of breathing exercises where you're breathing out longer every single hour. And that way you help to decompress, and you don't end up with a sort of a higher level of stress, for which it's estimated that even the 10-minute or exercise bout, the 10-minute meditation or the exercise bout would not actually counteract. So sort of decompressing during the day is actually been more effective than having a longer spell later on in the day. Vitally, you get adequate sleep, absolutely imperative. Impaired sleep can lead to all negative factors in health, and it upsets both cortisol and thyroid hormone function too. So ideally go to bed before midnight and enjoy 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Much easier said than done. And I will be presenting a webinar on insomnia coming, I think it's in September. Do meditate or engage in mindfulness. Meditation, the word can put some people off, but certainly engage in mindfulness regularly each day. And apparently laughing with mirth, which is a great word, can actually help with blood pressure and help with health. So there's no doubt about it that there is lots of benefits from laughter. Laugh with mirth, very, very good. And it's good to have some friends that make you laugh, and family too. Specific nutrition, there's going to be some very general ones, so forgive the simplicity of these things, but whole foods, avoid sugar and salt, refined processed foods, and have a lower glycemic index and glycemic load. Eat a varied diet, vital, and with adequate protein in order to stabilize blood sugar and insulin. All hormones and neurotransmitters are derived from protein, and protein will contain, if it's from certain sources, taurine in particular, but is only available from animal protein. So if you're a vegetarian, you need to do quite a lot of work to figure out where you're going to get your essential amino acids from, and that's going to be the subject of another webinar, and it's something that's close to my heart. I've studied this a lot. I spent 64 hours at least studying this for one presentation on the ability to gain adequate protein from being a vegetarian and vegan. Very interesting subject. We certainly know that a plant-based diet is super healthy, and it's akin to the Mediterranean sort of style diet, and I completely endorse that and support that on a scientific level. But the Mediterranean diet does contain fish and eggs, does contain animal proteins as well. It's not just vegetarian. And have antioxidant-rich food daily. Well, if you're having whole fresh vegetables, then you'll be obtaining those too. And organic, I would impress upon you. Iodine-rich foods, much less regularly consumed, but seaweed and seafood, so shrimps, for example, seaweed, if that's consumed, very important to get adequate iodine. And maybe one of the surprises for you today is oh gosh, Anthony talked a lot about iodine today. I wasn't really aware that was a factor, so perhaps that's the big surprise for us. Alongside oh gosh, low thyroid increases blood pressure too. So leafy vegetables for flavonoid content of antioxidants, very important. And good quality sources of omega-3 and 6 and 9 fatty acids. Olive oil contains omega-9. It's useful for inhibiting the oxidation of LDL cholesterol, but it's not providing the essential fatty acids of linoleic or alpha-linolenic acid, which are both important for producing the beneficial anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. Choose heart-friendly foods, and I've got lists of foods which we're going to go through quite swiftly that are coming up towards the end of, or at the very end of this slide deck. There are lots of foods and scientific references. Drink 2.5 liters a day, 2+ liters. And if you're doing exercise, add exercise water to that. Had the pleasure of meeting an individual recently and discovered that this individual was consuming 1 glass of water per day and 5 cups of instant coffee. really, it's remarkable how that individual functions. And can you imagine one glass of water and 5 coffees a day, and what impact can that have? Most chemical reactions in the body are operating in a watery environment, and absolutely vital that we have adequate hydration. Vital for blood pressure. If water is the main constituent of blood, if you're dehydrated, the blood pressure will have to be higher to squeeze the arteries to maintain the volume and the blood flow to the brain and vital organs. So having adequate water, absolutely vital. And of course, the concentration of salt would be higher if you have less water too. And if in terms of food, moderate sized meals, no large meals, and certainly 4 to 5 hour gap. So you have the postprandial process, and then you switch metabolism from glucose burning to fatty acid metabolism. So you have metabolic flexibility in order to minimize insulin over the day. So really straightforward recommendations. It's very akin to a Mediterranean paleo style diet, not having too much carbohydrate. So it's really the Mediterranean paleo benefits the vast majority of cases, but particularly cardiovascular health and blood pressure. And here's a little study which had 31 patients, the average age of 57.6. 53% of them were women and 47% were men. And so this is an outpatient clinic that had a high fat, adequate protein, a low carbohydrate diet. We'll look at the statistics at the bottom of the slide here: 20% carbs, 20% protein, and 60% fat. I'd like to know what that looked like. Well, here we are. It shows us it's raw nuts and seeds, avocados, olives, olive oil, flax oil, cod liver oil. So you've got your mix of omega-6, 3, and 9 there. Protein included sardines, and sardines have a particular protein in them called lysyl tyrosine. I understand lysyl tyrosine, which has a vasodilatory effect. So it seems that sardines of all foods may actually supply you with effectively a vasodilator, blood pressure lowering agent in sardines. And fish, eggs, tofu, chicken, turkey, wild meats, low-fat cheeses, seafood, and veggie burgers. So these are the proteins in this particular diet for these 31 patients. So here are the outcomes, and I'm going to highlight it for you. So they measured body weight, insulin, glucose, leptin, triglycerides, HDLs, creatinine, free T3, TSH, and systolic blood pressure and diastolic. So let's have a quick summary what they found. They found that the body weight levels went down. You can see it's 86 kilograms went to 79 on follow-up, and there was an 8.1 kilogram loss. Insulin levels halved from 22 to 11, so very good result there. And in terms of blood pressure, the systolic blood pressure went down from 136 to 121 and 86 to 76, so a great improvement for blood pressure. So really this nutritional approach worked very well, and the conclusion was that this nutritional program, originally designed to treat chronic diseases of aging, led to weight loss and metabolic changes currently thought to be beneficial in reducing the aging process. And that was over 11 years ago. So it's definitely a relatively high-fat diet, but the right kind of fats. So, and there's just highlighting the blood pressure changes. So here we have the models for assessing hypertension. So as a summary point, so it's the usual model that I supply during these webinars is trying to put things together. And we can see, we go around, start at just about before midnight on the clock face. We have too much salt. Too much salt, absolutely, in and of itself can make a difference. And it's interesting that individuals, and you may not be surprised at this, individuals who consume too much salt may also consume too much caffeine and alcohol. It's that kind of diet. Can you imagine? So it's salted peanuts and crisps with the beer or the wine after 6 o'clock. I mean, it's amazing what can happen after 6 o'clock, how much damage we can do. So too much salt and too much caffeine and alcohol definitely have a negative impact. Low iodine, again, repeating that, it's just been perhaps one of the surprises of the day, alongside the low thyroid hormone function. And low iodine may also lead to low thyroid hormone function, but there are a number of factors that can lead to low thyroid hormone function, including oxidative stress. And did you know that with low thyroid hormone function, there is increased oxidative stress? And it's been observed since the 1930s, at least, that individuals with low thyroid function and symptoms and signs of what would then recognize, maybe later on, to be low thyroid, have an increased risk of dying from cardiovascular events. It's also been identified that the crease in the ear, which is really to do with cross-linking of collagen, is also associated with low thyroid function and negative effects on cardiovascular health. So low thyroid hormone function, extremely common. It's subclinical hypothyroidism has been assessed and studied, as has primary hypothyroidism, but the subclinical aspect in the grayscale is about 17 to 20% of women ages between 45 and 64. But if you look at the actual truth of the matter, if you don't look at blood tests, because blood tests are not always very useful, it may be as much as 50% of women in that age group have a less than ideal thyroid hormone function. So really significant. And how many of them are eating seaweed and seafood every day and having adequate iodine? Elevated cortisol can be a risk factor for hypertension. We've identified that. Not surprisingly, it's the stress factor. And of course, that can be caused by last night not sleeping well. So disturbed sleep can lead to elevated cortisol. And if that's a chronic situation, it's a veritable torture. And so ensuring sleep is vital. Exercise can be very important for sleep and for stabilizing cortisol, and as long as one's not doing intensive exercise late at night, for example. If you have a family member that's got a high blood pressure pattern, that's a risk factor for hypertension. Maybe it's because you're following the habits and not just the genes of that family member. It's the habits. Age is definitely a factor, and being overweight definitely a factor. And insulin excess can be a major contributory factor to being overweight and inability to lose it. And what's also interesting is that elevated insulin and insulin resistance directly correlates with low thyroid hormone function. If you are African or of Caribbean descent, you've got an increased risk of hypertension. And we come around full circle to the key molecular mechanism in hypertension being oxidative stress and a lack of antioxidant enzymes in the body. So excess oxidative stress and lack of ability to scavenge and mop those up, triggering a whole cascade of events, the NADPH oxidase enzyme we looked at, and then having that role in the angiotensinogen 2, and then activating the constriction of the vascular tissue, leading to hypertension. So hopefully this is a simplistic but overview. So when you take your case history, you can identify which of these is relevant for your client and then address them accordingly. So what I've done now is I've got in a different coloring, so I'm just go, that's the model for assessing hypertension. This is the model for optimizing blood pressure. And it basically, I put the antithesis, the opposite of what to do. So stop or reduce salt, clearly. Stop or reduce alcohol and caffeine if you want to lower your high blood pressure. Restore iodine status, that's more simply said than done because it can take an age, particularly when there are halogens on the other halogens blocking the halogen receptor for iodine uptake. And the iodine uptake can be very slow by the thyroid and can take quite some time. You need to improve thyroid hormone function, and that might require for some individuals to get a blood test to prove to their doctor that they need thyroxine. However, there's this large swathe of the population in the subclinical that needs some specific nutritional support for the thyroid hormone function. We can lower cortisol. It's not often understood by medical colleagues that you can do that. And certainly if they haven't got access to this salivary testing of the day, they won't have any understanding that levels can fluctuate in the daytime as opposed to just a 24-hour urine or test or a simple plasma test. Engaging in adequate sleep hygiene, very important. Do take regular exercise. And certainly if you're older and or you've got a family history of blood pressure, you need to increase your proactive protection and engage in more of these things to offset your risk of having high blood pressure. And if you're overweight, you do need to lose weight and you need antioxidants to improve the sensitivity of insulin. And certainly if you're African Caribbean, you need to engage in all the protective measures you can because of the greater risk, and make sure you get adequate vitamin D, which is an important note for darker skinned folk. And you need to make sure we've got adequate antioxidant enzymes and antioxidants in our diet. So it's whole fresh food. And so it's following that sort of dietary advice of the Mediterranean paleo, fresh whole food, no refined processed foods, to help to correct that. And what I'm doing next in the next slide is to give an indication of the supplements that I found to be most clinically effective to achieve the outcome in the box in which they are. So here you have a model for optimizing blood pressure, and I put in a sort of dark olive green color the names of specific supplements that fit in to the box. So I'm just going to go up one slide, and we see model for optimizing blood pressure, and then these are the supplements that I found to be effective, and some of them repeat, but the particular taurine mix that Dr. Mark Houston put together, there it is, the BioCardio Cert BP blood pressure. Again, one client that I had take it didn't have a beneficial impact, and they couldn't actually tolerate it, and they had to stop it. Otherwise, everyone who's taken that, their blood pressure is lowered. And looking at the evidence and support of what it provides, maybe it's understandable. And of course, what we'll be doing, unlike a trial, which is just using a mix of supplements and not changing anything else, we'd be engaging them in the multifactorial change as well in terms of their caffeine, stimulants, and salt and so on, and optimizing their antioxidants, supporting their thyroid and iodine if relevant, and maybe assessing their cortisol if that's relevant, and optimizing their sleep, having them take regular exercise, so shifting them into healthier habits, certainly losing weight, and certainly if individuals can engage in something to feel better, and of course the weight may be connected to inflammation, which may be connected to insulin, but that may also be connected to hypothyroidism, which increases oxidative stress, which also may be linked to high levels of stress and cortisol, which directly impairs thyroid hormone function, which then increases oxidative stress. But still, those individuals won't be getting enough antioxidants from the diet anyway, and they'll need antioxidant supplements to help that. So hopefully that's a straightforward, and again, it's really focusing on that, that sort of common denominator for hypertension, which is oxidative stress, but notwithstanding the salt and caffeine and alcohol. Of course, the caffeine and alcohol can actually deplete, certainly alcohol can deplete antioxidants too. I believe the caffeine can be quite good for one. Certainly one coffee a day can be beneficial, but I'd recommend the real stuff and not necessarily instant. So there we have the model for optimizing blood pressure. And what I've got now is a list of foods, which I'm going to fly through before we come back to the supplements to sort of end on. So this is a list of foods, and I've identified studies that have been conducted looking at this food alone. So eat a certain amount of this food and you get this result. So it's very isolated, it's very insular and singular in looking at it. But imagine you put all these foods together into a Mediterranean paleo style diet and see what the outcome would be then. So watch out for salt. We know that's a negative factor. So almonds, we know it helps to lower cholesterol in this particular study, and pre-diabetes. So it actually helps with insulin sensitivity, which can have a role to play on blood pressure. So it helps with blood fats in this particular diet study. And then carpane in papaya has been found to help blood pressure on its own in an animal model. So papaya may be one of the better fruits to have, given that too much fruit is not a healthy thing for one. Mushrooms, again, Superman in terms of immune support, but also may help with cholesterol and blood pressure and oxidative inflammatory damage. So a sort of an all-round superfood, really. And it may be the button mushroom here shown on the left, may be the cheapest, best immune support food in existence. Organic mushrooms costing £2 a punnet or even less, literally may be the most economic, best food for one's health available, full stop. This study shows that blood pressure can help with hypertension as well. Avocado, monounsaturated fats helps with cholesterol, and may also have advantage for the low, enable one to have a low carbohydrate diet, which in that study found that it lowered blood pressure too. It benefits, so again, it's to do with lipids. The avocado helps. Olive oil, it helps cardiovascular disease. It helps to reduce the LDL oxidation. It helps stabilize cardiovascular conditions once there. It's in raspberries, which are pictured with blackberries here, but raspberries apparently have got 37 compounds of antioxidants, and they're the richest of all known foods for antioxidants. The most efficient antioxidants were from raspberry seeds. So raspberry, my favorite fruit, and they tend to be the richest in antioxidants. And what are we looking at? We're looking at antioxidants for the oxidative stress, which is the prime mover and shaker for driving hypertension. Blueberries, of course, very beneficial. And for metabolic syndrome, we've got more information, more studies on blueberries. Watercress supports sod and glutathione peroxidase in the blood while eaten. Love watercress, have it regularly. Also protects against DNA damage. Green tea extracts. Now, too much caffeine in green tea can maybe elevate blood pressure, but certainly 1 or 2 cups a day, very useful for cardiovascular health due to its antioxidant function. And there's an inverse association between green tea and various serum markers of cardiovascular and liver conditions. It's reduce your risk for mortality from cardiovascular disease if you drink green tea. Flax seeds, modest effect on LDL cholesterol, reduces lipoprotein A, which is actually quite a challenge, not many things do, and improves insulin sensitivity in women who had a high blood fat levels. So flax seeds, also the lignans in there has a benefit for reducing inflammation. And more information, and so flaxseed, yes, it's a functional food and reduces cardiovascular risk. It might be best to have them freshly ground, and those are available in order to release the benefits. Otherwise, it has a beneficial effect in furnishing a smoothing effect in the bowel. Walnuts, associated with blood fats, beneficial for cardiovascular disease. Watermelon contains citrulline. Now, I have not really focused on arginine and citrulline. Arginine is the precursor for nitric oxide, but the more arginine you take, the less well absorbed it is. It transfers to, it converts to citrulline and it goes back again. So it's a two-way mechanism, transformation to go to citrulline. But by providing citrulline is much better absorbed than arginine, and by taking citrulline, it's actually quite possible to have a benefit on the vasodilatory effect. But still, you might have to, well, you certainly will have to support your level of antioxidants to support that endothelial function working properly. But citrulline is found in watermelon. It's also found in a supplement that allergy research do as a powder, and citrulline is a much more effective way of supporting nitric oxide than arginine. Arginine also feeds herpes viruses and may not be appropriate for those folk. Purple sweet potato, I think this is orange, not the purple one, but nonetheless, there's rich in anthocyanin with antioxidant benefits. So as a useful carbohydrate source, red peppers contain antioxidants that's been found to have a variety of different conditions and venous tissue. The tomato is well documented for its benefit on lipoproteins, LDL, homocysteine, platelet aggregation, blood pressure, and the lycopene also supports actually cognitive, the brain function, and eyes, as well as the prostate. And so again, tomato is useful. It was deemed to be, the tomato, a poison in English history for 300 years. The tomato is believed to be a poison until someone ate it and didn't die, and then it was eaten more widely. But 300 years it was perceived to be a poison. Black rice contains a useful level of antioxidants, supporting cardiovascular health, and helps to reduce the cholesterol levels and supports HDL cholesterol. Wild salmon, this is wild salmon. I'm not sure if that truly is, but really it should be wild salmon. Has been shown to help support cardiovascular and reduce the risk of fatal incidents of heart. And the long-chain fatty acids may also support blood fats too. Not an antioxidant per se, but supports fats. And I'm a fan of getting your fatty acids from the fish, the whole fish with polyphenols, rather than fish oil supplements in particular. This is one of the largest studies in the world that's been conducted. It's called the Physician's Health Study, with 20 years of follow-up, and eggs do not seem to influence the risk of cardiovascular disease in male physicians. And we got 80,000 women in 2 prospective studies showing that 1 egg a day is unlikely to have a substantial impact on cardiovascular disease in men and women. And we end with the sardine, the little powerhouse that actually in itself is basically almost acting the same way as medications might do to help to optimize blood pressure. And I believe that one of the main reasons is this amino acid lysyl tyrosine, which helps to lower blood pressure. Phew. So a whirlwind through some foods, and wouldn't it be great to have those? I'm referring to this model for assessment for hypertension. This is for us to consider for our clients. And then we have the antithesis. What do you do to achieve normal blood pressure, normal attention? And here's what you do, depending on what the individual needs would be. And here are some considerations in terms of supplements to consider for those various imbalances. Whew, well done on listening fast. Thank you so much for your attention. You've got these notes to refer to. I'm really sorry that some of you had issues with the sound. I'm just looking at the notes here. Okay, not all of you had the same experience, but I'm sorry for those who did. And what Alice will do, she'll send out the recording to you when it's available. So she'll send the recording to you, and maybe the recording will come out differently than that which you heard first time around. So sorry about that. But again, thank you so much for taking time out. Really appreciate you being present. Hectic lives. I just hope that's been useful, and I wish I could get the feedback from you. But do send me feedback on the email, which is going to be provided in the next slide, which is here. info@Nutri-Link. You're more than welcome to give me feedback. Like, I like this bit, Anthony. Could you have done more on that? Or you could ask me a question on something I didn't cover. And perhaps you'd also like to, if there's a subject close to your heart that you'd like me to dedicate part of my life to present a webinar on, please share that topic with me too on this. That'd be very helpful. We want to serve you and provide you with what you'd like, but hopefully you like the way I present these and then present that model. So things to consider, things to intervene with, try and summarize it. I read lots and lots of research papers. I read through them quickly, read through them slowly, and condense the information and make it available. So we've learned about the RAS, the renin-angiotensinogen system today. We've learned about iodine, learned about thyroid, learned about the importance of antioxidants again, and also we've learned about the heroic amino acid taurine. So again, really hope that's been useful for you in clinical practice. You've taken home some ahas, from that, and insights you were unaware of, which is the whole point in a way. So again, thank you so much for your attention. Wish I could be in the same room as you. I mean that. It'd be great. Here's me talking to my computer, but I'm glad I know some of you in the audience, so I can imagine you there. I'd like to thank you for your attention. You will get a recording of this. Please write your questions to me in the next 48 hours. I'll anonymize them, put them in a Q&A, get them done eventually. Sorry if there's a bit of delay on that. And thank you again for attending another Nutri-Link webinar. I shall sign off. Thank you so much. Bye for now.